Okay, can, awesome. All right. So again, good evening and welcome to the community meeting for the Detroit Commercial Multifamily Energy and Water Benchmarking Ordinance. I would like to take the time to acknowledge that the city of Detroit is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, the people of the Three Fires, Ojibwe, Potawatomi, and Odawa. Through these words of acknowledgement, I honor the Anishinaabe people's contemporary and ancestral ties to this land and contributions to the city of Detroit. So today we will have our welcome. We'll go over why are we here. We'll have opening remarks from Joel Horani Harris, who is the City of Detroit's Director of Sustainability. We'll go over the big picture, tying benchmarking to the climate crisis, racial equity, and environmental justice. We have a video to share with you about an energy efficiency and renewable energy project that happened at the Pablo Davis Senior Living Facility. We'll go over ordinance definitions, design process, and proposal. And then we'll talk about looking ahead, how to engage. And then the last 30 minutes of this meeting is set aside for questions and answers. So again, my name is Brittany Turner, and I will be your facilitator today. I am an energy analyst with EcoWorks, a small environmental nonprofit that works at the intersection of sustainability and community development and has been in Detroit for 40 years. I am joined today by Kendall Kuhneman and Ben DeWicki, who lead the Energy Waste Reduction Committee of the City of Detroit Green Task Force. Kendall and Ben, I'll give you a moment to briefly introduce yourselves.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Kendall Kuhneman, and I'm a program manager with the Detroit 2030 District.
Hey all, thanks for joining. My name is Ben DeWicki. I'm the Director of Community Partnerships at Walker Miller Energy Services. And I will jump right in and talk a little bit about the Detroit Green Task Force. So the Green Task Force is it's a group of largely non-city volunteers who share and convene seven committees that are listed below, touching on several aspects of sustainability and environmental justice in the city of Detroit. The task force is here to inform Detroit City Council and is currently convened by Councilman Scott Benson in District 3 and work fairly closely with the Office of Sustainability at the city. The various committees, most of them convene regular monthly meetings where it's a kind of an open platform to discuss resources or projects, challenges, and make connections in their area. And then there's also been a number of policies that have gone through the Green Task Force in order to be passed, such as the post-construction stormwater ordinance, the greenhouse gas reduction ordinance, and hopefully this benchmarking policy. Next page. So the Energy Waste Reduction Committee specifically, just co-chaired by Kendall and myself, we formed in March of 2019, looking specifically at issues of energy efficiency in the city, opportunities to increase energy efficiency, identify inefficiencies, and largely look at both in commercial and residential sector where we can provide opportunities to reduce energy burden and improve really the building stock in our city, which we know has implications beyond just energy and dollar savings, but in a lot of public health aspects as well. So our key priorities are eliminating energy poverty here, helping to become a carbon neutral city and saving millions of dollars in energy costs.
Awesome, thank you. So why are we here? Well, for one, we want to inform you about this ordinance policy development and details. Secondly, we want to gather your input and suggestions. Thirdly, we want to share that there is a survey going out at the end of this week, and will stay open throughout the month of October. The intent is to collect feedback on policy recommendations from the Detroit community. So what is benchmarking and transparency? Well, benchmarking means tracking the energy use in our building. It gives building owners the information they need to become more energy efficient, compare energy use to similar buildings, and track progress over time. Energy use in Detroit typically comes in the form of electricity, natural gas, and steam. This ordinance also includes tracking water usage. So once you have 1 year of data established, a building owner can then compare that baseline of usage to current data. Importantly, under this ordinance, only building owners are responsible for reporting energy usage, and this ordinance does not require energy efficiency upgrades to be in compliance. So what does transparency mean? Well, transparency means reporting benchmarking information to the city, which is then shared with the community. Typically, this is done using Energy Star score from the US EPA Portfolio Manager software tool. So this is similar to miles per gallon rating on cars or nutrition labels on packaged foods. So we have a quiz here. Go ahead and get this going. So our first quiz is, according to the US EPA, how much energy consumed by commercial buildings is wasted? So again, according to the US EPA, how much energy consumed by commercial buildings is wasted? Is it 15%, 30%, or 45%? I'll give folks just 20 seconds. Okay, just 10 more seconds left. All right, so it looks like most folks said 30%, and you are right. So the average building wastes 30% of the energy it consumes because of inefficiencies. All right. Our second quiz is, in Detroit, what percentage of total greenhouse gas emissions come from buildings? Is it 25%, 41%, or 63%? I'll give folks 20 seconds. We have 10 more seconds. Okay. It looks like most folks said 41%, and the answer is actually 63%. So in Detroit, 63% of our emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, are coming from buildings. So why buildings in Detroit? Well, buildings are the single largest user of energy in the US. As we just saw, buildings in Detroit account for 63% of citywide greenhouse gas emissions. Here you can see the orange bar on this bar graph shows buildings and facilities, and that is a pretty large portion of the greenhouse gas emissions in the city of Detroit. So industrial, institutional, and commercial buildings account for 40% of all building emissions in the city of Detroit for greenhouse gases, making them prime candidates for impactful reductions. So finding ways to reduce building energy use is critical to achieving the targets set in Detroit. Here are a couple of initiatives that are going on in Detroit. So one is a greenhouse gas ordinance that was passed in 2019. The Sustainability Action Agenda, which has a goal to directly call out reducing municipal and citywide greenhouse gas emissions. And then most recently, the Detroit Climate Strategy, which is being worked on as we speak. And Joel is here to talk a little bit more about that with you today. This is a little bit more information. The greenhouse gas ordinance is requiring 35% reduction by 2024 for municipal buildings and 100% by 2050. 30% greenhouse gas reductions for the city by 2025. All right, so you may be wondering, what is the connection between greenhouse gas emissions and buildings? Well, majority of our energy sources, electricity and natural gas, are fossil fuel based and emit a suite of gases when burned in the air, such as carbon, that consequently heats our Earth. This heating or warming is contributing to climate change and a climate crisis. One of the effects of our changing climate are heat waves and power outages. So here on this slide, you can see, according to Brian Stone Jr., who's a professor at the Georgia Institute of Technology, every dimension of heat waves has been increasing over the last 20 years. If you have a historical heat wave and blackout and it persists for as long as 5 days, you're very likely going to see many more fatalities than we saw in New Orleans after Katrina, which is pretty enormous to think about. In this map here, this is a graphic that shows heat vulnerability index by Detroit census tract. The dark blue represents the lower vulnerability and the red represents higher vulnerability. So these tracts are showing heat islands, which you can think of in the red. And as our Earth warms, this will only get worse, which is why we need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible. And benchmarking is just one approach to addressing the climate crisis and energy consumption in buildings. Then there's also flooding. So this year alone, we've had 2 major historic Detroit flooding events, one in June and then one in August. And right now, residents and businesses are still cleaning up from the flooding. Just to give you some perspective, in 1892, that was the last time, or the wettest June on record for Detroit. So that was the entire month with 8.31 inches. And during one of these flooding events, we received that much rain just within one day. Okay, so another quiz. How many cities in Michigan have a benchmarking ordinance? Is it 3, 0, or 1? I'll give folks a few seconds to go ahead and get those answers in. Okay, give you just 5 more seconds. All right, so let's see what folks said. Okay, so most people said 1. Well, technically, there are 0 benchmarking ordinances in the city of Michigan. However, the city of Ann Arbor's city council unanimously passed their first read of their commercial and multifamily benchmarking ordinance just yesterday. So even though there technically is not a benchmarking ordinance in the city of Detroit or in the state of Michigan or a city yet, there is one that is potentially on the way. And this here is a map of the United States and existing benchmarking policies. And what we've put here is a little heart for Detroit, saying let's get Detroit on this map. All right, so now I will hand it over to Joel Horani Harris, who is our Director of Sustainability for the City of Detroit.
Thanks, Brittany, for that great introduction. So I want to talk a little bit about the Detroit Climate Strategy and the context that it provides for the benchmarking discussion. So we kicked the Detroit Climate Strategy off before the pandemic, but we re-kicked it off earlier this year. Next slide. And so really, we are working collaboratively with our Climate Equity Advisory Council, who are residents from impacted areas, with a number of technical analyses, surveys, and also focus groups that we just ended up our most recent round last week. And really, the purpose of that is how do we create a vision for a future that can help determine our priorities going forward in the next 5 to 10 years. Next slide. And so we've really been thinking about how do we reframe adaptation and mitigation. And mitigation really is talking about how do we have a lower carbon future that's going to reduce our impacts on climate and also create opportunities in the clean energy economy and create affordable and accessible energy for more residents, as well as preparing for those climate impacts that we know are already happening, such as flooding, extreme weather, and ensuring that our buildings are resilient to the climate changes we're already seeing. Next slide. So we also want to talk about how do we prepare for climate impacts. And so we are creating a climate vulnerability index similar to the one that you see on the screen here that will help us target investments to specific areas that are more vulnerable because of their exposure or their capacity to adapt or their household characteristics. Next slide. So thinking about our low carbon future, what are some strategies we can take? So you can see Brittany referenced earlier the 2012 emissions inventory. This is actually from 2018. And you can see we're actually going down because the grid is getting cleaner. We know DTE is retiring coal plants. However, if we want to do it at the rate that we need to, we're going to need to really dramatically accelerate investments to reduce the carbon we're creating. And two potential lines you can see are that blue line and that green line, which are our two potential community climate targets, which I'll talk about in a minute. Next slide. So you can see from that greenhouse gas inventory, almost 70% of our city emissions are actually due to the building sector. Next slide. So when we think about how we're reducing our climate impacts, we really want to think about wedges. And so you can see this is a messy graph because we've sliced up our reduction targets into a whole bunch of little teeny skinny pie pieces that we need to enact each one of those in order to reach the target that we're aiming for. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the next few slides, what that means. So some of the strategies that would be applicable would be, zero carbon buildings, renewable energy, electrical appliances and vehicles, public transit, and then similar on the adaptation side, green stormwater infrastructure, utility infrastructure upgrades, resilience hubs. We can go on the next slide. And so you can see that this is the buildings wedge, but you can see there's a number of sub-wedges that are illustrated here. And you can see that in order to achieve a reduction of half by 2034, it's going to take substantial investments in every sector. And so housing, almost 80,000 housing units, and businesses, over 5,000 businesses would need to be retrofitted. Over 4,000 businesses would need to be retrofitted to become more energy efficient, to save at least 35% per building. So that's a significant number. And thinking additionally about net zero new buildings, renewables, so rooftop solar, clean electrification. So we talk about that because we want to have buildings go to fully electric because we can clean the grid for that, whereas we can't clean the grid from natural gas. And then I would be remiss to talk about industrial energy efficiency. And so essentially, the baseline of being able to reduce our own energy usage is rooted in the need to know what energy we are actually consuming right now. And that's where the benchmarking ordinance comes in. And so the city of Detroit has been walking the talk in terms of benchmarking our own buildings. We have over 150 buildings of our own benchmarked, and we are participating in the 2030 district. So we're leading by example, but we would like to, but we know that knowing what you're consuming and therefore how much carbon you're emitting is an essential first step. And so I do think the benchmarking ordinance and benchmarking in general is an excellent strategy and something that needs to be integral part of this work. And so we are next steps in the climate strategy. We are doing a series of town halls in November. You can find the schedule at that link down below, detroitmi.gov/climate. And so we would love for your participation in any way that you are able to do so. But I appreciate the time. And I also just want to appreciate Ben, Kendall, and Brittany's efforts in this really important project. Thanks for the time.
Awesome. Thank you, Joel. Okay, so after hearing that, we're going to talk about the big picture that's going on right now that's relevant to this. So what's happening globally? Well, basically, Detroit is at risk of being at a competitive disadvantage if we don't address the climate crisis and the opportunities for investment in Detroit. So 450 major investors holding $41 trillion are demanding climate action now. This is the strongest call yet from investors, urging governments around the world to take bolder steps to fight the climate crisis. Also at the federal level, this year in April, President Joe Biden announced that the United States will aim to slash greenhouse gas emissions by year 2030. And then at the state level, last year, Governor Whitmer ordered the state of Michigan to achieve carbon neutrality by year 2050. Here locally, with the city of Detroit in 2019, again, the Detroit City Council unanimously passed a greenhouse gas reduction ordinance. There has been initiatives from the global level all the way down to our local level to address the climate crisis. All right, so another quiz. All right, nearly 36% of Detroit's population lives below the poverty line. On average, how much of their income do you think is spent on utilities? So just to give you some context, a household of 4 living at the federal poverty line brings in $26,500 a year. So I'll give everyone just 20 seconds to put in those answers. Okay, 10 more seconds. All right, I'll end this poll. Not letting me hear my results, but everyone said 30%, which is correct. So here in this graph, this shows Detroit energy burden, which is dollars spent on utilities from someone's salary. And so you can see most of Detroit is here around the 12 to 15%, which is twice as high as what is considered high for energy burden. So also, this is a graph showing City of Detroit poverty by race and ethnicity. And so here you can see more than 70% of Detroit residents living in poverty are Black. And then it goes down to a little bit more than 10% are white, a little bit less are Hispanic, and it goes down from there. But this gives you a snapshot of who is living in poverty. So what I'm doing here is making the connection between benchmarking and racial equity. Equity is ultimately accountability to BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities, low-income communities, and marginalized groups. You're really aiming to make a real difference in the lives of people and making sure that they receive the benefits and not the undue burdens of policies and programs. So benchmarking policies present important opportunities to consider how collecting and sharing data can help advance equity goals in tandem with climate goals and centering equity and benchmarking policies and implementation. It starts with gaining an understanding of the inequities that communities face, their visions of our communities and goals. Okay. So although this policy does primarily impact commercial spaces, it does include multifamily and where people live. And so using benchmarking data can be a helpful identifier for health, comfort, and safety that accompany energy inefficiency. So a few of the indicators when you see a poor performing building is that it may have poor insulation, leaks, and mold. And benchmarking can help you better address these critical issues. All right, so I will now show you a video, a story that was recently completed about the Pablo Davis Senior Living Facility in Southwest Detroit. And then after this, we'll get some feedback from you all.
I would describe Pablo Davis as a very friendly community.
I like it's very peaceful. You know, they have a lot of amenities, and it's kind of away from the beaten path from where I'm from. So I like it, yeah.
This is the nicest place for any senior to live. It's very nice. And I said, it's like family here. I said, everybody looks out for each other. And you couldn't want a friendlier place.
Pablo Davis is an 80-unit senior multifamily rental development in Southwest Detroit. Bridging Communities is a local nonprofit. They're the sponsor.
My name is Phyllis Edwards. I am the Executive Director for Bridging Communities located in Southwest Detroit. I believe that all people are entitled to pursue their dream of whatever that is of happiness, and that there are some basic needs among all folks that is needed: housing, education, transportation, mobility, recreation. I like the fact that we're advocating for quality housing for everyone. And senior living needs to, we're advocating that it be changed, that you have maybe independent living on one floor, assisted living on another, and long-term care on the other, so that people get to stay in their own neighborhoods around people that they've known and grown up with and aged in place with.
My name is Maria Schechter, and I think I'm one of the longest residents that have been living here. What attracted me to Pablo Davis was the fact that we were allowed to garden. We have garden boxes out back, raised garden boxes. That attracted me because I said, oh, good, I can grow veggies, I can grow flowers, I can, I can putter in the soil, I can weed, keep myself busy. And that's what I've been doing all these years.
Pablo Davis is a LIHTC property. It was developed, and its 15 years had ended, and we were re-syndicating the property. And so we were looking for the most efficient ways to ensure that the property was sustainable through the years to come. One, cut energy costs, provide clean energy to the residents, and to really minimize the amount of energy we were using in that building. With the new appliances, the new HVAC system, the solar roof, the windows, and doors, we were able to meet that.
They came in, they gave us all new appliances, which are energy efficient. They, remodeled the whole inside of our apartments, each apartment, as well as the whole building.
The energy renovations that they did here at Pablo Davis, I was quite impressed. I was quite impressed with the solar system that they put on the top of the building.
We looked up at all those panels and said, wow, we had talked about this years ago. And it finally came to light. If we had a house, would we do it? Yeah, we would do it in a minute. So for it to happen was like a miracle.
I know it affected the heat, I think, and the electricity.
The changes in the energy, the windows made a big difference. The doors made a big difference. I noticed that in the wintertime, there wasn't as much of a draft.
It's very important to have clean energy in any community.
The Detroit office of the Local Initiative Support Corporation funded a grant to do the energy analysis, which eventually led to all the energy improvements. And those energy improvements were forecasted to save about $35,000 a year in utilities. And we're 1 year into it, and the savings have been about $34,000. So it's pretty much on the mark.
So essentially, we're looking at, even the building envelope, the insulation in the building as well. And the first thing we do is benchmark the building. So that is looking at the utilities. We look at electric, natural gas, and water. And we identify how much the facility is using, how much it's costing the facility. We also look at how much it's costing the tenants, right? There's a split here. The tenants pay some of the utilities and the owner pays some. That's the first thing we do. So we benchmark the building and we identified it as poorly performing, right? So it was below average. Then we take that information and then we do a walkthrough of the building and we look at the heating and cooling system, the ventilation systems, and the lightings, and we document what they are. And we come up with retrofit solutions that will reduce the energy consumption of the building. So some of the, most cost-effective energy efficiency items are switching to LED lighting. The second most cost-effective often is the ventilation systems, right? You don't want to have fans blowing constantly. And then we also looked at the boiler systems, insulation in the building, and some of those other items. And then we prepare a report in which we look at how much they were using before and how much they would use with our engineering analysis. And we find the energy savings for these energy saving measures.
Low-income housing tax credit is funding that is made available to ensure that people who are below 60% of the AMI have somewhere to stay. That is funding through the government along with other funding. It's one part of the funding source. And so those properties have to be maintain that affordability for the next 30 years. We were able to get 50 vouchers, Section 8 vouchers, that's place-based, so that will stay there. We were able to work with Cenair and Chase for some additional funding. We worked with the City of Detroit to get home funding. And so as a result of all of the different types of funding, and we work with Michigan, let me say that, to get the light tax credit. And so as a result of that, that's the funding, combination of the funding that we had to do to produce the monies necessary to rehab that property.
I think I can say in my experience, had we not had the vouchers and had we not had that energy analysis, I don't know if we ever could have completed Pablo Davis and put it on good financial footing and done a rehab. It was a rehab of about $4 million for 80 units, and that was very significant.
For us, the impact is huge because I would just use the Pablo Davis. Without that, we were limited in our resources and our funding. And it was only that energy saving cost that was able to make this project viable. So without that, we wouldn't have made it.
I would urge them to do whatever they could to make it possible financially for a senior citizen to be able to rent an apartment.
I would hope that they would understand, first and foremost, that there is a need and that they should be funding these projects, new energy sources. We can no longer continue to do business as we've done before. The world is changing, and it impacts the lives of seniors, it impacts the lives of residents, of children, and it certainly have restraints on organizations such as Bridging Communities and other developers throughout the city and out this country. And so we really need to begin to infuse this new way of providing energy to residents and organizations and just the community as a whole. Solar is just one aspect of environmental fight that we fight.
Southwest Detroit has a number of different facilities that residents are living in close proximity to. You know, throughout that whole region, oil refinery being the biggest, but that is just one. It's a whole corridor, you know, of environmental toxins. Not to mention the truck idling and the truck traffic, you know, in Southwest Detroit. I think that we're living under 400 plus years of racialized capitalism, 500 years of racialized capitalism. And the racialized capitalism, it is exploiting and killing. And it's exploiting and killing people, and it exploits and kills the earth. But we just can't have that system, you know, that's based on suffering and that's based on the dollar being the most important thing. You know what I'm saying? And there's lots of ways. People are doing it in so many different ways. But, you know, like a garden, a farm, creating a farm, you know, in which you don't need the dollar in the same way to get the food. And so you're teaching people that food comes from the ground, food comes from the work, food comes from this relationship with the ground, and the dollar is supplementary. You know, the dollar is supplementary to that. And so the real solutions is not in the technology per se, but it's in the thought processes. And we can use those technologies, you know, but we have to use them with new thought processes and make sure that they're cooperative, make sure that they're regenerative.
Okay. Now we want to get your feedback on too many on my screen on that video. Let me go back to my chat and I'm going to paste in here. If you can go to menti.com, it's also right here. It's menti.com, and then type in this code 26240035. You will see a question here that said, how did this story make you feel? And I'll also put it in the chat. And then this is anonymous, so when you respond, your responses will show on this screen right here. Okay, so we have happy, hopeful, inspired. You need structural change. And the way this word cloud works is bigger the word and the more the often that it has been inputted in here or added. All right, so that wraps up our section about the big picture. And the intent behind showing that video is an example of what it looks like to follow through with a project that is addressing efficiencies in a building. And it all starts with benchmarking the energy usage to then know what to measure and what to change. So now I will hand it over to Ben and Kendall to review the ordinance definitions, design process, and proposal.
Thank you, Brittany. You can go to that first slide. So we're going to talk a little bit. We've kind of laid a lot of groundwork here, set some context, and so now we're going to get into like what we're really proposing here. So what really is this benchmarking policy that we're talking about? Well, it's a policy, so it's a legal mechanism that would be introduced and passed through City Council and run by the city, administered by the City of Detroit, that would require commercial and multifamily building owners of certain size buildings, which we'll get into in a minute, to report information about their building's energy and water consumption annually to the local government. So tracking buildings' energy and water use is called benchmarking, which we've talked about, and it's typically done using a tool like Energy Star Portfolio Manager, which is used almost as a standard throughout the country with all of these other programs that we've seen and all of these other policies. And to the effect that it will be used to track the actual energy use. So the building owners will be required to submit that data through Portfolio Manager to the city annually. And then that information will be made publicly available, not directly. We won't be posting things like your actual kilowatt hours or electricity and gas usage, but we'll be using typically an Energy Star score, which is produced through that Portfolio Manager platform. And that's the transparency aspect. So we'll keep getting into this a little bit. If you go to the next slide. So the policy this is really a foundational policy for future change. You heard Joel talk about how this can be used to help to better manage the greenhouse gas reduction goals that the city has set. The state is setting similar goals, and the country is likely to be setting similar goals as well. And so being able to manage, being able to measure is as helpful to being able to manage. So this will also allow for owners and possibly tenants to understand where opportunities are for reductions in operating costs. And it will reduce, ultimately, as we start to see people take advantage of those reductions and identify those wasteful areas, it'll result in a reduction of greenhouse gases and pollution. And the transparency aspect is helpful because it starts to set a standard and educate the general population on how energy is used in buildings. The miles per gallon example for cars is a great one because before miles per gallon existed, you didn't know how much gas your car was going to burn if you have a car before you bought it or leased it. So you had to be an engineer to kind of understand a bigger engine. But now you don't have to be an expert on cars to understand whether that car is going to be efficient or inefficient because you have a number. And so we're seeing that this policy works in various cities across the country. Even without mandating anybody actually make any energy efficiency improvements, the simple act of measuring and understanding will help to better manage where you're at. It'll also put you up against your peer buildings so that you can understand better, hey, I am performing better or worse, kind of like your DTE bill might say now. And it encourages people to dig deeper and identify those areas of waste and say, why am I using 20% more than my peer buildings? Energy efficiency spending, once we do start to do these energy efficiency improvements, is largely local. You can't really outsource replacing LED light bulbs or fixing boilers or furnaces. So that money is spent in the community, and it's a huge opportunity for workforce development and skill and trade development here at home. And the market needs this motivation for a lot of reasons that other markets need motivation. We've seen some buildings take advantage of programs like the 2030 district, which are free and voluntary, but we have upwards of 1,400 or 1,500 buildings that we're looking at benchmarking, and really only a percentage of them are involved in voluntary programs right now. So in order to really start to move this forward and to bring this into kind of create a social norm out of this, we're looking at a policy as the best way, and this has been proven to be true in various other countries or various other jurisdictions across the country. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to Kendall.
Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about our design process and timeline, just to give everybody some background of where we've come from. So starting in early 2020, the EWR committee began researching policies similar to this one in other cities across the US. We had a lot of calls with Chicago, Denver, Minneapolis, Indianapolis, Columbus, and several others. So we focused on just analyzing other policies. In May and June of this year, we convened a new advisory committee of building owners and representatives of buildings that would likely be impacted in needing to being required to report their building's energy usage to the city of Detroit. And we convened 4 advisory committee meetings with that group to collect their feedback, to hear some of their concerns and challenges. And now we're at the community meeting. Currently, we're recording this meeting to post on the Green Task Force website so that it will be available after today. And what we are hoping to get from today is also hearing feedback from the community so that we can really hear from the advisory committee as well as the larger Detroit community and come up with policy recommendations for the city of Detroit. So this is just what our timeline has looked like over the course of the past year and a half. So this is our proposed schedule. So this is a phased approach. Let me break this down. So the first column is showing that the initial reporting date in which a building is required to submit their energy and water data is July 1st of 2022 for all municipal properties that are 10,000 square feet or greater, as well as all non-city or commercial and multifamily properties that are 100,000 square feet or greater. So July 1st of 2022 is the initial reporting date. And then those buildings would continue to report on an annual basis after that. Following the 2022 date, all commercial and multifamily buildings of 50,000 square feet or greater would report July 1st of 2023. In the far right, you see that there is a initial data transparency year. So that is always 1 year behind when the building is required to report. So that allows for building owners to collect their energy data and improve on their score if they'd like before their building's Energy Star score is made public. Next slide. And then the Detroit building stock analysis. So this is just an initial analysis that we did using SEMCOG's data. And so if you were to look at all commercial and multifamily buildings of 50,000 square feet across the city of Detroit, we're right around 1,400 buildings. And we haven't entirely scrubbed this list. It was our initial analysis, but that gives us an idea of how many buildings are we talking about. And this represents about 36% of the total building square footage in the city. Next slide. And these are some of the typical exemptions that other policies across the US have written into their ordinances. So typically, buildings that meet one or more of the following are not required to comply with the ordinance. So if there's a residential building that has less than 5 units, a building that would be considered standard industrial classification, any properties that might be owned by government bodies that would not be subject to authority to the city of Detroit, a building facing financial hardship, an unoccupied or vacant property or property that's less than 50% occupied, any building that is planned to be demolished, or a building that does not receive energy or water utility. And I wanted to just, before we move on to the next slide, I wanted to mention the standard industrial classification. So we all know that Detroit is an industrial city. And in our opinion, we think it would be a missed opportunity if we did not include industrial buildings from the reporting and transparency requirements. And our advisory committee felt the same on that. Okay, next slide. So this is just an example of what does transparency look like as part of these policies. So on the far left, these are small little images, but clips of interactive maps that other cities like Philadelphia, New York, and Boston have put together on their city website, where the public can go and see how a building is performing based on some sort of rating system or scale. Earlier, I mentioned Energy Star score. That is a very common one that is used where you aren't, as Ben mentioned, you're not seeing a building's actual energy or water usage data, but you're seeing how that building is performing based on a score like the Energy Star score. And then scorecards and infographics. So these are things that cities often provide building owners to kind of help them understand how their building's performing and offer some suggestions on how they might improve their score. So they're not just throwing this policy at building owners, they are providing workshops and education and other resources and support to help those buildings improve their scores. Next slide. And this is just a brief, I'll just briefly say, this is just an example of Energize Denver map. So if you were to Google search or search online for any of these other cities that have ordinances, you can find their interactive maps and see how they're presenting this data to the public. Next slide. Okay, Brittany, I'm going to turn it back to you to do another quiz here.
Okay. Reason it's not starting these quizzes anymore. We'll just answer them in the chat. But our quiz here is, what is the city miles per gallon equivalent for this car? And it's an equivalence because it is an electric car. So your options are 90 miles per gallon equivalent, 132 miles per gallon equivalent, or 108 miles per gallon equivalent. You can put your answer into the chat. Give folks just a few seconds. All right, and then the answer is actually 108. So a few folks got that. So go to the next. Okay, so then the next question, if I can get this quiz to work. Still not working. Okay. So the question is, what is the Energy Star score of this building? 62, 81, or 93? Yep, good question. So that is out of 100. So just to give you a hint, the Energy Star score ratings go from 0 to 100. 0 is the worst, 100 is the best. And to get the certification, you have to have a score of 75 or greater. So what do you think is the score, Energy Star score of this building? 62, 81, or 93? Yeah, few 81. 62. So the actual Energy Star score of this building is 81. This is the Griswold building. Okay. All right, and then I'll hand it back over to Kendall.
All right, so we wanted to touch on this. So this is a map of the US, and the areas that you see in color that are highlighted are examples of utility service territories where the utilities are providing their customers with an automatic data import functionality. So what this means is that the building owners that are required to report their building's energy usage to the local government don't have to do, it's not such a manual process for them because the utility is providing it in an automated way. We currently do not have any utilities in Michigan that are providing something like this. But if you go to the next slide, well, first I wanted to mention that we all of us who have a DTE account can create an online account, and we can access something called DTE's green button, download my data. So this is where you can log into your account and you can download usage data in an Excel format or CSV, and this is a helpful option, but it's still not in the format that would be required for a building owner to easily report their data to the local government. But on the next slide, DTE is working with the Detroit and Ann Arbor 2030 districts on a pilot that launched in the end of April of 2021. And this is looking at how to automate that data entry from DTE to Energy Star Portfolio Manager automatically so that the building owner would not be required to do it manually. So if you are a building member of either Detroit 2030 district or Ann Arbor 2030 district, and it is free to become a member, this is a pilot that is available to building members only at this time. Next slide. Okay, Ben, do you want to cover this case study?
Yeah, so we, as we mentioned earlier, talked to a number of different municipalities and jurisdictions about their benchmarking programs and policies, not just in the Midwest with cities like Indianapolis or Columbus, Pittsburgh, but also farther and around the country. So we did, one of the programs we spoke to was Denver. They have sort of a similar size program as far as the number of buildings. And so their program is run by, it's externally managed by a contractor, but it runs up to, or they report really to the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability and Resiliency in Denver. And the program in Denver costs about $156,000 a year. Now that, again, it doesn't just include the ability basically to dump your data into Portfolio Manager, but these programs have a lot of wraparound services, including sessions, educational sessions and help desks on how to get that data imported. But then also they're committed to creating partnerships and making sure resources are shared for things like energy efficiency, utility rebate programs, financing programs, energy audits, and other technical resources as well. So there's a lot of support that goes into these benchmarking programs for the buildings that are participating in them. And just to reiterate, I think we mentioned earlier, there's no cost to the building owners to actually benchmark these buildings. And so finally, what we're hoping to achieve with this type of program is a number of things, including increased resiliency of our entire community. We know that when our buildings are efficient and they have equipment that isn't old, which is usually equal to inefficient, that they are less prone to go out, especially during high heat, high AC events. Reducing operating costs in all buildings really, but especially those of where folks are living in affordable housing or fixed income households. Increasing the number of buildings benchmarked, and all of these, the number of these rest of these are centered around increasing the amount of data we have to better manage our greenhouse gas emissions and ultimately to better reduce those greenhouse gas emissions. And then also collecting that data to understand where opportunities exist to reduce energy burdens and really direct benefits of energy efficiency dollars to those who need them the most. Back to Brittany.
Okay. Well, thank you all. That wraps up the portion of the presentation for today, but opens it up for questions and answers. So before we do that, just want to provide you guys information here. This is contact information for Ben, Kendall, and myself. And then you can learn more about Detroit's benchmarking ordinance at the City of Detroit Green Task Force website. We will provide this slide deck and then a recording of this meeting after the meeting that can be shared with anyone who is interested. So first of all,